Welcome to Silent Queen's Rise. I'm glad you're here. Now let's get into the story. She was standing at the departure gate with her carry-on in one hand and a boarding pass in the other when her husband told her she wasn't coming. Not that the flight was delayed. Not that the plans had changed. He told her, in the flat, impatient tone of a man canceling a lunch reservation, that he had decided she would be more comfortable at home. The trip was business, he said. She wouldn't enjoy it. He'd already called the car to take her back. Behind him, a woman in a cream linen blazer was checking her phone and pulling her roller bag a little closer to his, the way people stand when they've rehearsed the distance between them and decided, it's exactly right. Naomi did not make a scene. She did not raise her voice. She pressed her boarding pass flat against her palm, and she breathed. 2 slow breaths, the kind she used at work when the numbers on a screen were telling her something had gone very wrong, and she needed to think clearly before anyone else in the room noticed. Then she looked at her husband. Then she looked at the woman in the cream blazer. Then she looked at the gate agent behind the desk, who was carefully studying the ceiling. She said nothing. She took her carry-on and walked to a chair near the window. She sat. She watched the plane pull away from the jet bridge. She watched the woman in the cream blazer walk through the gate door beside her husband, roller bag clicking on the tile. She watched the door close. Then she reached into her bag and took out her phone and made a call to a number she had not dialed in 2 years, a number that was not in her contacts under any name, that she had memorized the way a person memorizes the combination to a safe they hope never to need. The voice on the other end answered on the second ring. "It's time," Naomi said. "Where are you?" "Denver International. Gate B34. Give us 20 minutes. She ended the call. She sat by the window. She watched another plane push back from the gate. She watched the sky turn the particular shade of pale orange it gets over the Rockies at 6 in the evening, in October, when the light is low and clean and seems to reach all the way to the edge of something. She was not crying. She had not cried in a very long time. She had learned in the years before this one to take the energy that other people spent on tears and redirect it into something more useful, into documentation, into patience, into precision. Her husband would be in the air for the next 4 hours. She had been waiting far longer than that. Part 1. The woman behind the balance sheet. Her name was Naomi Osei. To her husband, to his family, to the social world she had moved through for the past 5 years with quiet efficiency, she was simply Naomi. The one who organized everything. The one who showed up, prepared, who sent the thank you notes, and remembered the birthdays and made the dinner reservations and never once asked to be acknowledged for any of it. What none of them knew was that Naomi Osei was born Naomi Daisy Pembroke Finch, the only child of Clement Pembroke Finch, the founder and sole owner of Pembroke Capital Partners, a private equity firm with controlling stakes in 11 mid-market companies across healthcare infrastructure, logistics, and commercial real estate, and a portfolio that institutional investors had been trying to independently value for 20 years without success. Because Clement Pembroke Finch did not believe in transparency as a public posture. He believed in it as a private discipline. He had built his entire empire on the understanding of exactly what things were worth, and the patience to wait until everyone else caught up. Naomi had grown up inside that empire the way a diamond grows inside pressure. She had watched her father walk into rooms and say very little, and walk out with everything he wanted. She had watched people spend enormous energy performing for him, because they mistook his silence for emptiness. It was not emptiness. It was appraisal. She became an actuary, not a fund manager, not a board member, an actuary, the kind who works for a mid-size insurance company in a Denver office building, who eats lunch at her desk and wears her hair in a bun and drives a Subaru Outback and has never once mentioned that her father controls more capital than most regional banks. She published 3 academic papers under her mother's surname, Osei, which is all that anyone who worked with her knew her by. She was good. She was very good. Numbers were not abstract to her. They were a language, the most honest one she knew. And she had been fluent since she was 9. Her father had not discouraged the experiment. He had, in fact, suggested it. Clement Pembroke Finch had been married twice. The first marriage, to Naomi's mother, had been the only one that lasted, and it had lasted because Adaeze Osei had not wanted anything from him except the man himself. He had watched that kind of love from the inside, and he understood how rare it was, and he understood that his daughter, growing up with his name and his money, would never be able to locate it unless she removed herself from both. "Find out who they are when they think you have nothing," he told her. the week she started her first job. Because that is who they actually are. Naomi carried that instruction into every relationship she entered. She carried it into the bar where she met Trent Halverson on a Thursday night 4 years before the airport, when she had just finished a 10-hour modeling session for a catastrophic loss scenario and wanted one glass of red wine in a room that did not contain spreadsheets. Part 2. The husband. Trent Halverson was an architect. He had the particular confidence of men who design beautiful things for other people to live in. A confidence that comes partly from genuine talent and partly from the assumption that aesthetic vision translates into general authority. He was handsome in a structural way. Good bones, clear eyes, the kind of face that photographs well at 40 and will continue to do so. He was charming over dinner. He was attentive in the early months. He asked about her work and seemed genuinely curious, which was unusual, because most people's eyes glazed over within 30 seconds of the word actuarial. He did not Google her. He did not ask about her family. He made her laugh 3 times in the first hour and called the next morning, which in Naomi's experience was not a given. She ran her usual assessment. She watched how he spoke to servers. She watched what happened when a project fell through, whether he blamed the client or examined the drawings. She watched who he became at his own firm's parties when he thought she was in the bathroom. She watched for 18 months before she agreed to marry him. She filed the results with the specific notation she reserved for data that was inconclusive. Promising trend, insufficient sample size, monitor closely. The pattern that emerged in the years after the wedding was not dramatic. That was the thing about it. It built itself slowly, the way water damage builds behind a wall, invisible until the surface begins to buckle. Trent's firm had been struggling before they married. 2 major projects had gone over budget. A founding partner had left. The firm needed restructuring. Naomi did not fund the firm. She funded the household precisely and completely, because the actuarial mind does not leave variables uncontrolled, and she needed to know what a man looked like when the bills were paid and the pressure was removed. What he looked like was comfortable, serene in a way that had nothing to do with contentment and everything to do with the absence of any responsibility for the serenity. He came home to a house that ran. He wore clothes that were always clean. He ate food she had planned and sometimes cooked and always sourced. He attended social events she had arranged to maintain the network his firm depended on. He mentioned her to colleagues as my wife in the same tone one might say my accountant, appreciative but fundamentally administrative. He did not ask how any of it happened. He did not ask because it had always happened, and things that have always happened become invisible, the way load-bearing walls become invisible when a building is standing. Part 3. The in-laws. Gordon and Helen Halverson had built their self-image on the scaffolding of their son's career. Gordon had been a contractor. Helen had been a dental hygienist. They were not unkind people in the abstract. They were, in practice, the specific variety of unkind that comes from spending decades in a world that confirmed their opinions without challenging them, so that their opinions had calcified into facts. They had from the beginning a theory about Naomi. The theory was, she was fine, but she was not exceptional, and Trent had done adequately, but not spectacularly. This was delivered not through insults, but through the particular grammar of faint praise. Helen mentioned often that Naomi's job must be so reliable, in the tone one uses to compliment a pension plan. Gordon made jokes about number crunchers at family dinners that were not quite directed at Naomi, but always landed adjacent to her. The Halverson family Thanksgiving. 2 days at Gordon and Helen's house in Colorado Springs, at which Naomi's contributions to the meal were consumed without comment, and her absence from a group photograph of the Halverson siblings was explained as we didn't realize you were right there. Sorry, we'll do another one. And then another one was not done. Trent's sister, Bryn, who worked in marketing and spoke entirely in the language of brands and positioning, had decided early on that Naomi was low-key. Bryn meant this as a mild compliment and a mild criticism simultaneously, which is the only kind of compliment Bryn gave. She's very low-key, Bryn would say when Naomi was not in the room in a voice that meant, she doesn't shine. What Bryn was observing was not the absence of something. It was the deliberate suppression of something enormous. Every time Naomi sat at that table and let a joke about number crunchers go by without answering it, she was making a choice. The choice had a cost. She paid it because she was still gathering information, and you don't reveal your hand in the middle of a hand. She had filled, by the end of year 3, a ledger. Not a literal ledger, though she had one of those too, a mental one. A precise cross-referenced accounting of every small exclusion, every faint praise, every moment she was left out, or looked past, or treated like a piece of furniture that had been placed adequately but could easily be replaced. She kept the ledger the way she kept all data. Without sentiment, without editorializing, with the cold accuracy of someone who would eventually be building a model from it. Part 4. The Discovery. Naomi found out about Kristen Draper on a Sunday in March. She was not looking. She was updating the household insurance policy, a task she performed annually with the discipline of someone who understands that the catastrophic scenarios in her professional life are not hypothetical. Trent's laptop was open on the kitchen island, logged into an email account she had never seen before, on a secondary browser profile she had not known existed. She looked for 40 seconds. Then she closed the laptop and finished the insurance update and took the dog, a 3-year-old black lab named Scout, for a 40-minute walk. She walked at her normal pace. She did not cry. She was processing, in the way actuaries process, not with emotion first, but with the recognition that a variable she had not modeled had just entered the equation, and the model needed to be rebuilt. When she came home, she made dinner. She set the table. She fed Scout. She did not mention what she had seen. She began to document. Over the following 6 weeks, she assembled a record with the same rigor she applied to catastrophic loss modeling. Phone records, accessible because the account was in her name. Credit card statements, joint account, recurring charges at a boutique hotel 20 minutes from Trent's office on Thursday evenings when he had standing client presentations. Email threads visible through the secondary browser, which she accessed from her own device using credentials she had noted in those 40 seconds on the kitchen island, not because she needed to read every word, but because she needed to understand the scope and duration. The scope was 11 months. The duration was ongoing. Kristen Draper was an interior designer who had worked on one of Trent's projects 2 years earlier. She was 33, professionally photographed, the kind of person who made her living making other people's spaces beautiful. Naomi noted the symmetry without bitterness. Her husband designed the shells of things. His girlfriend decorated the insides. Together they were building something she had never been invited to. She organized the documentation into a secure drive, encrypted, accessed only from a device that had never been connected to any shared network in their home. She dated every entry. She verified every piece of evidence. She cross-referenced. She built the model the way she always built models, from the ground up, variable by variable, until the output was undeniable. She did not confront Trent. She did not signal that anything had changed. She continued managing the household and cooking the food and scheduling the social engagements and taking Scout to his vet appointments for his hip dysplasia, which Trent knew about in the abstract but had never managed in practice. She was not waiting passively. She was waiting actively, the way a person waits for a contract to close. Every piece of information was useful. Every day of documentation was leverage. She had learned from her father that the moment you reveal your hand is the moment you lose the ability to control what happens next. She was not ready to reveal her hand. The airport was the moment she understood. She no longer had a choice. Part 5. The airport. The trip to Scottsdale had been planned as a long weekend. A conference Trent was presenting at, plus 2 days of personal time he had suggested, almost warmly, which should have told her something. Trent was not a man who suggested things warmly without a reason. She had packed. She had arranged for the neighbor's daughter to check on Scout. She had made a dinner reservation for Friday night, a place in Old Town she had read about and wanted to try. She did not know until they were at the gate that the reservation was not for her. Standing at gate B34, watching the boarding door close, Naomi understood that the trip had never been for her. The trip had always been for Kristen Draper, whose name she had seen in the hotel confirmation that had arrived in that secondary email inbox. There had been 2 rooms booked. He had planned to use one of them to send her home. She sat in the chair by the window and waited for the plane to push back, and she looked at the mountains through the terminal glass and felt something shift inside her. Not collapse, not break. Shift, the way a fault line shifts, quiet and enormous and permanent. She had been performing patience for 6 weeks. She had been gathering information and building the model and waiting for the right moment. Trent had just chosen the moment for her. She made the call. Part 6. The activation. She did not go home. She called a car to a property she had purchased 3 years earlier under a trust structure, so layered it would take a forensic accountant with significant motivation several weeks to trace. A townhouse in Cherry Creek, a neighborhood in Denver where the streets are quiet, and the trees are old, and the buildings are the kind of well-maintained that suggests someone cares without announcing it. The townhouse was clean. The refrigerator was stocked. A lockbox on the door held a key she had never shown anyone. She had not stayed here before, but she had maintained it with the care of a woman who understood that contingency planning is not pessimism. It is the acknowledgement that the world contains variables you did not design. When she walked in, the lights were on a timer. The heat was already running. There was a note on the kitchen counter from the property manager, who maintained the place monthly, verifying that everything was in order. She called her father. Clement Pembroke Finch answered before the second ring. "I'm out," Naomi said. A pause. Not surprised. Waiting. "Are you safe?" "Yes." "Where Cherry Creek property?" Another pause. She could hear him thinking, which was not sound exactly, but a specific quality of silence she had known her whole life. The silence of a man who does not waste words, because he has spent decades watching other people waste them and calculating the cost. "I'll have the team in Denver by morning," he said. "Legal, financial, investigative. Don't reach out to him. Don't respond to anything he sends. Let it come through counsel." "I know, Naomi." A longer pause. "What exactly did he do?" "He brought her to the airport. He told me I wasn't coming. He had her boarding pass in his jacket pocket. I saw it when he reached into his coat for his phone." The silence that followed had density. She had heard silences like this from her father before, rare ones, the kind that came before he did something quiet and irreversible. "I'll be there by tomorrow afternoon," he said. He hung up. She set the phone on the kitchen counter and looked out the window at the dark street, and she felt for the first time in 6 weeks something that was not calculation. Something that was closer to the feeling of setting down a weight you have been carrying. So long you forgot it had a shape. She did not sleep much. She planned instead, the way she always planned, methodically and without sentiment, until the plan was complete and the variables were controlled, and the only remaining question was how long it would take before Trent noticed she was gone. Part 7. The Unraveling. It took him until the following evening. He texted from Scottsdale at 7:15. "Running late, don't wait up." She read it and did not respond. He texted again at 10. "You asleep?" She read it and did not respond. He called at 11, voicemail. He called again at midnight. She watched her phone light up and set it face down. By morning, a legal team of 3 attorneys had filed for an emergency protective order, citing the events at the airport and supporting them with testimony from 2 witnesses, a gate agent who had observed the interaction, a traveler who had filmed a portion of it on his phone while waiting for his own flight, not out of malice, but because he had been standing 3 feet away and thought something was wrong. The film was 22 seconds. It showed Trent Halverson at gate B34, telling his wife to take the car home, and the woman in the cream linen blazer moving through the gate door behind him. It showed Naomi standing still. It showed the door closing. It was more than enough. Simultaneously, a forensic accountant Clement's office used for due diligence had begun a full audit of Trent Halverson's financial life. This took less time than it should have, because Trent's financial life was both straightforward and precarious. The architecture firm was carrying debt. The mortgage on their home, in Naomi's name, paid through Naomi's account. The joint credit cards, carrying a balance Trent had been growing for 8 months with charges she had been covering in silence. The car payment, the quarterly property tax, the cleaning service, the grocery auto deliveries, the vet bills. Naomi had been maintaining the entire material infrastructure of their lives, while Trent had been maintaining the fiction that he had built something worth living in. The forensic accountant also flagged something Naomi had not known about. Trent's firm had submitted a proposal for a large civic project, a mixed-use development adjacent to a light rail corridor in the city's northwest corridor. The project was funded through a public-private partnership. The private side was anchored by a real estate investment trust. The trust had a major institutional stakeholder. The stakeholder was a fund. The fund's largest LP was Pembroke Capital Partners. Naomi did not own the project, but the table the project was sitting on had her family's fingerprints on the underside. She did not reach for it. Not yet. She sat in the Cherry Creek townhouse and reviewed the audit and felt Scout's warm weight against her leg. Because Scout was there, had been there since the night of the airport, retrieved by a car service she had arranged with a neighbor. The arrangement made in a single text message at 9 p.m. the evening she left. Because she had thought about Scout, before she had thought about most other things, and she was not going to leave him in a house with a man who did not know where his vet records were kept. Part 8. The Panic. Trent came home from Scottsdale on Sunday evening. He found the house dark. He found Scout's bed empty. He found Naomi's closet untouched in a way that confused him, because all her clothes were still there. Her shoes, her jackets, the row of sensible work clothes, and the smaller row of things she wore on evenings out. But her toiletries were gone. Her laptop was gone. The small brown leather notebook she kept on the nightstand was gone. And Scout was gone. He called her voicemail. He called again. Voicemail. He called Bryn. Bryn said she hadn't heard anything, and her voice had a careful quality that suggested she was deciding in real time what she knew. He called his mother. Helen said it was probably a misunderstanding. She said Naomi was sensitive. She said these things blow over. They did not blow over. Monday morning, Trent received a call from an attorney with a firm he had never heard of, informing him that his wife had retained counsel and filed for protective order, and that all future contact must be routed through legal representation. A divorce petition was being prepared. He was not to contact Naomi directly. He called his own attorney, a man he had used once for a contract dispute, who reviewed the filing and called him back with a tone Trent had not heard from him before. "She has documentation going back 11 months, the attorney said. "Financial records, your communication records from a secondary account, hotel receipts, a witness statement, and video footage from the airport. And Trent, she's been paying for everything. The house, the utilities, the car, the credit cards. Do you understand what that means for the division of assets?" Trent sat in his car in the parking garage of his office building and felt the floor shift. "Who is she?" his attorney said. "What do you mean?" "I mean, the firm on the other side of this is not a local family law practice. It is a firm that does not advertise, does not have a website, and whose clients I have only ever read about in contexts that involve private equity and estate law." "Who is your wife, Trent?" Trent did not have an answer. He had never asked the question in a way that required one. Part 9. The Withdrawal. Naomi did not attack Trent's life. She withdrew from it, and the withdrawal exposed what had been invisible. The first week, the mortgage auto draft failed. Naomi had transferred the account. Trent did not know the mortgage servicer's name, the loan number, the login credentials, or the address to which a check could be sent. He spent 2 afternoons on hold with banks, trying to determine which institution held the loan, because the property deed was in Naomi's name through a trust entity, and he had never thought to ask. The second week, utilities, same structure. Naomi's accounts, Naomi's credentials. The internet went first, because that was the auto draft that processed earliest. Then the gas. Trent received 2 paper notices because Naomi had opted out of paperless billing for every household account, not out of anachronism, but because she understood that paper creates a record and records create options. The third week, the Civic Project. The public-private partnership Trent's firm had been pursuing hit what the project manager described as an unexpected LP review process that would delay the financing timeline by 60 to 90 days. The delay was not punitive, it was procedural. But procedure, when it involves an LP the size of Pembroke Capital, has the texture of geological movement. Slow, inevitable, reshaping the terrain without appearing to try. Trent's partners called an emergency meeting. Trent sat at the head of the conference table and provided no answers, because he did not have them, because he had spent 5 years living in the output of Naomi's systems without ever learning how the systems worked. Gordon and Helen drove up from Colorado Springs to help. Helen discovered the household management system Naomi had built over 5 years. A shared drive with folders for every utility, every insurance policy, every recurring expense, every maintenance schedule, every warranty document, every pet record. It was color-coded. It was cross-referenced. It was maintained with the precision of a professional operation. Helen called Gordon into the kitchen, and Naomi could imagine the conversation, because she had run the probability on it months ago, and the result had been this. He cannot function without her. He just didn't know it. What he said to Gordon, standing in that kitchen in front of a shared drive he couldn't navigate, was, "I thought she was just organized. I didn't realize organized was holding the whole thing up." The whole thing. He was almost right. It was not just the household. It was the professional network she had built him, the dinner parties, that led to the connections, that led to the contracts, the social calendar she had managed, the client relationships she had maintained with birthday notes and thoughtful follow-ups, and the kind of invisible relational labor that made Trent Halverson seem like a man who was good at more than drawing buildings. Without it, He was a man who was good at drawing buildings. Buildings that, it turned out, required a great deal more than drawings to actually get built. Part 10. Kristen's exit. Kristen Draper had been in a relationship, in her own telling, with a man who had his life together. She had watched Trent from a particular angle, the angle of the Thursday evening, and the boutique hotel and the phone calls at lunch, which is not a complete angle. It is the angle at which a life looks its most curated. He had talked about architecture and vision and projects and momentum. He had seemed like a man in motion. What he actually was, she discovered over the 6 weeks after Naomi left, was a man in freefall who had not yet understood that the parachute was not his. He called her from the dark house. He called her from the parking garage. He called her once at 2 in the morning to tell her he didn't know where the fuse box was. Kristen came to the house once because she had told herself she was a person who showed up. And what she found when she showed up was a man surrounded by paper utility notices and takeout containers and a scout-shaped absence on the rug by the couch, and the creeping awareness that the house she was standing in had been designed and maintained by someone else entirely, and that someone had taken the design with her. Kristen was good at making spaces beautiful. She was not good at making spaces functional from raw material. That was a different skill, and it was not one Trent had. She left her key on the kitchen counter. She did not call. There was nothing to explain that the house didn't already say. Part 11. The presentation. The annual gala for the Denver Center for Architecture and Urban Design was Trent's professional world's most significant social event. He sat on the advisory board. His firm had sponsored a table for 3 years running. He had told Naomi in the weeks before the separation that this year's event would be important because the civic project's backers would be in attendance, and he needed everything to go smoothly. She had, before the airport, already confirmed their table, their auction donation, and their seating requests. After the airport, she had made one additional change. The event's keynote address was delivered each year by a distinguished donor. The prior year's donor had given $80,000. This year's lead donor had given an amount that required the gala committee to revise the program twice and add a line to the podium introduction they had never used before. Trent was seated at the firm's table, in a new suit, with his partners, when the event coordinator approached the microphone and introduced the evening's distinguished donor, the Pembroke Finch Foundation, established 1998, with holdings in healthcare infrastructure, civic development, and arts funding across the Mountain West. Tonight, represented by its Director of Community Investment, Naomi walked in. She was not the woman they had seen at these events before. The bun was down. The careful professional neutrality was still there, but it was no longer a disguise. It was a posture. She wore a deep green dress, no ornamentation, the kind of garment that announces money not by displaying it, but by declining to display anything unnecessary. The small compass pendant, white gold, that her father had given her on her 35th birthday, hung at her collarbone. She walked directly to the podium. She did not look at Trent's table. She spoke for 5 minutes. She spoke about the role of invisible architecture in cities, the systems that hold communities together that nobody photographs or publishes in journals. She spoke about the people who build the infrastructure that other people call their own, the ones who make the networks run, and the relationships hold, and the projects get funded, and then are told they're just organized when the systems work and blamed when the systems don't. She did not say Trent's name. She did not mention the marriage. She did not have to. Every person in that room who knew them both understood exactly what she was describing, and exactly who had built it, and exactly who had consumed it, without once looking down to see the foundation. She returned to her seat. She was placed, by the committee's seating arrangement, at the head table. Trent's table was in the second row. His lead partner leaned over to him during the applause and said, very quietly, "Who is she?" Trent had no answer. He had sat beside this woman for 5 years. He had eaten her food and worn his clean shirts and attended the parties she arranged and moved through the professional life she had quietly built around him. And he had never once asked her the question his partner was asking now. He had not asked because he had not thought the answer would matter. Part 12. The final accounting. The weeks after the gala finished what Naomi's departure had begun. The civic project financing remained in procedural review. Trent's firm, already disorganized and losing the momentum that had quietly depended on Naomi's relational infrastructure, began losing proposals. 2 clients they had been cultivating for years signed with competing firms. The advisory board of the Architecture Center, whose social connections Naomi had maintained with 5 years of careful correspondence, began routing their conversations elsewhere. Trent's attorney negotiated. Naomi's attorney responded with documentation. Gordon Halverson called the legal office and asked to speak with Naomi. The attorney declined. Helen left a message. It was long. It said sorry several times in a way that did not name anything specifically wrong, which is the grammar of apologies that are really auditions for forgiveness without the cost of actual accountability. Naomi listened to it once. She noted the content. She filed it in a folder she had created for exactly this category of communication. Bryn sent a text. It said, "Hey Naomi, I know things have been rough. I've been thinking a lot about what happened, and I just want you to know I always thought you were amazing. Also, I have a client who might be interested in working with the foundation. Could we connect?" Naomi read it. She did not respond. The woman who had called her low-key for 5 years could reach the foundation through the website, like everyone else. Trent called once, through counsel, to ask whether there was any possibility of reconciliation. Naomi was at the Cherry Creek townhouse when the message was relayed. Scout was asleep in a patch of afternoon sun on the living room rug. Her father was at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a set of Q3 reports, working, the way Clement Pembroke Finch worked everywhere he went, quietly and without requiring anything of the people around him. She looked at her father for a moment. Then she said to the attorney, "Tell him no, and tell him that I don't have any anger toward him. I want him to understand that. The anger would mean I expected something different. I didn't. Not by the end." She paused. "Tell him the house will be sold through the trust, and the equity will be allocated per the prenuptial agreement he signed without reading closely enough. Tell him to find a good accountant. He's going to need one." Part 13. The Compass. On a Saturday in late November, 8 months after the airport, Naomi sat on the terrace of the Cherry Creek townhouse with a cup of coffee and a blanket and Scout's head on her knee. The Rockies were white already, early snow, and the morning air had the particular clarity that comes in Colorado after the first hard freeze, when the light seems to have been rinsed clean of everything unnecessary. Her father sat across from her. He had been in Denver for 2 weeks. He had come ostensibly to review a portfolio property. He had stayed because he was her father, and she had been through something, and Clement Pembroke Finch expressed care through presence and practical assistance rather than conversation, which suited her perfectly because she was the same way. He had made breakfast, eggs, toast, good coffee, the orange juice he squeezed himself because he did not trust cartons. He was reading a briefing. She was watching the mountains. Scout shifted his head on her knee. She looked down at him. He looked up at her with the dark, guileless eyes of a dog who has no interest in being anywhere other than exactly here. She thought about the first time she had taken Scout to the vet, and Trent had said absently from the couch, "Thanks for handling that," as if she had been handling a task he had temporarily set aside, rather than building a relationship that would sustain this dog for the next decade. She had filed that moment in the ledger. She thought about the ledger. She thought about 5 years of entries, each one small, each one deniable, each one adding, in the aggregate, to a portrait she had been building with the patience of someone who understood that data does not reveal itself in individual points. It reveals itself in the pattern. You have to wait for enough points before the pattern becomes undeniable. She had been waiting, and now she had the pattern, and now she was sitting in the sun with her dog and her father and her coffee in the mountains, and the ledger was closed. Her father lowered his briefing. "You know," he said, which was not how he usually began sentences, "your mother used to say that the most dangerous thing a capable person can do is make themselves invisible to protect someone else's ego." Naomi looked at him. "She made herself visible with me," he said. "Eventually. That's when things got better." He went back to his briefing. He did not elaborate, because Clement Pembroke Finch did not elaborate. He stated things once, with precision, and trusted you to hear them. Naomi looked at the mountains. She thought about the word invisible. She had been invisible by design. She had removed herself from the Pembroke Finch name and its weight because she wanted to be known for herself. And what she had found, when she removed the name, was that the men she encountered were not actually interested in knowing her. They were interested in knowing the her that served them, the her that managed and organized and optimized and made things run. That her they were very comfortable with, the other her, the one with the father and the foundation, and the numbers that had made her who she was. That her they had never asked about. Not once. Not in 5 years. She reached up and touched the compass pendant at her collarbone. Her father had given it to her on her 35th birthday. It was white gold, small, engraved on the back with a single word in her mother's handwriting. Orienting. Not oriented. Orienting. Present tense. A continuous process. She had oriented herself, for 5 years, around a man who had no interest in her direction. She had been moving through his life, organizing his life, sustaining his life, while he had looked out at the horizon and seen nothing but what he expected to be there. She was done orienting around other people's expectations. Scout lifted his head and put his chin on her knee more firmly, a reminder that he was still there. And the coffee was probably cold, and the morning was not going to stay this still forever. She looked down at him. She scratched behind his ears. He closed his eyes. Her father turned a page. The mountains stayed where they were, enormous and indifferent, and exactly what they were, without apology, without explanation, simply present and permanent and very, very clear in the November light. Naomi picked up her coffee. It was cold. She didn't mind. She had learned over the past 8 months that warmth is not a quality of the vessel. It's a quality of the person holding it. And she had enough of her own now that she didn't need to borrow it from anyone else. The quietest woman in the room is not always the one who has nothing to say. Sometimes she is the one who has already calculated exactly what the room is worth and decided she can build a better one. And when she walks out, she takes the blueprint with her.